how many how many of you think the immigration bill is dead? The I'm glad because you're all right. It's not dead. There's been a wave of press stories this past week about how, Chairman Goodlatte has said he doesn't want a pathway to citizenship, and the House is going to take it up piecemeal. All those things are true, but that doesn't mean the bill is dead. The way it's going to become law is if they can come up with some compromise that gets a majority of the Republican caucus. Speaker Boehner has said he's going to adhere to the so-called Hastert rule, which is 50% roughly of the Republican caucus. He said a vast majority of the Republican caucus, but they have to come up with some watered-down version that will get past the Republican caucus. And the most obvious watered-down version is something that legalizes the illegals who are here but doesn't give them citizenship. And the Democrats will be happy with that because, A, the illegals will be happy that they're legalized. They'll get 90% of what they want. They don't. Citizenship is a far-off goal. And once that happens, the Democrats can come back next year and say, look, you Republicans, you consign these people to second-class citizenship. So the Democrats get the best of both worlds. They get legalization and they get a club to beat the Republicans over the head with for the next few years. So it's not dead. The most likely weak spot is this idea of not a path to citizenship, but just legalization, maybe a path to citizenship for the so-called dreamers, the people who allegedly came here as children through no fault of their own. But the big question is, will half the Republican caucus go for that? And that's what we're deciding this summer. That's why it's so important to show up at the town halls like Brad Sherman's, because the only thing that's stopping them is fear. Look at their fear. They're scared of the voters. Look at the array of forces. Democrats are all behind it, 100%. There used to be Democrats who worried about the effect on wages, like Byron Dorgan. They're gone. The news media, CBS, NBC, ABC, of course, are for it, but Fox is for it too. Murdoch is for it. So we've lost all the media. All the money is against us. All the donors in the Republican Party, practically, I know of one rich guy who's on our side, but basically 99% of the donors, 99% of the money are supporting Amnesty, in part out of idealism, in part out of a desire for cheap labor. The only thing stopping it is fear of the voters. That's why candidates like Marco Rubio and Kelly Ayotte, who promised that they wouldn't be for amnesty in the election, had to promise that to get elected, and then they turned around and did the opposite of what they said. But they were scared enough of the voters so that they didn't mention it. Lamar Alexander just published an op-ed defending himself against a Tea Party challenge in Tennessee that didn't dare mention immigration. That's the main beef with him, is that he voted for the Senate bill, but he didn't dare mention it. So the fear is the only thing that's going to stop this fear of voters in a democracy, and that's why it's very important to keep active this August, because the media is primed to say, oh, the Tea Party failed, the Tea Party is withered. Look, they didn't show up at the town halls the way they did in 2009 and 2010. So that's the state of play. How did I get into this issue? I got into this issue because it reminded me of welfare reform in two respects. Welfare was a case where you're faced with a dilemma. You have a poor person with a child, usually a single mother. You'd like to help them. But if you help them, then you encourage other people to put themselves in that situation. So it's what David Ellwood calls the helping conundrum. You don't know quite what to do. In the mid 60s, the entire elite of both parties, there was a bipartisan consensus that we should just grasp one horn of the dilemma and just give people money, guaranteed income. And it was fostered by Democrats, but it was proposed by Richard Nixon. and supported by Daniel Moynihan. Basically everybody was for it, just the way everybody is for amnesty now. There was only one lonely voice out in California, a politician named Ronald Reagan, who said, no, this is a bad idea. This is not just a dole, it's a mega dole. And it turned out the voters hated it, and they managed to stop it. And we came up with a much better idea in '96, which is require work. Don't just give money, but require work. Similarly, right now, there's a uniform bipartisan consensus. This is a great idea. Have comprehensive reform. Why we'll legalize the people who are here, bring them out of the shadows, and we'll of course secure the border. And somehow it's going to help both the Democratic and Republican parties. The economy will prosper, and why? How could you oppose this thing? And similarly, I think for reasons I'll get to, it's a bad idea. And the same sort of sloppy thinking that people got away with welfare, they're getting away with on immigration. The classic sloppy thinking on welfare is they said, well, if you raise welfare payments, that won't encourage people to go on welfare. That won't encourage people to move from state to state, higher welfare benefits. And everybody who lived in Milwaukee said, no, people are coming from Chicago every day for the high welfare benefits. Of course they come from state to state. And people said, oh, well, there's no permanent underclass on welfare. People get off after 2 years. And then they looked at the records more closely and discovered after a few years that people were making coding errors, and it was really like 4 years, 6 years on average, which meant there was a whole bunch that was more than 6 years. So similarly, people say, well, if you give amnesty, that's not going to encourage more people to come across the border. Well, of course it's going to encourage it. It's encouraging them now coming across the border just to talk of amnesty. And people say, well, the immigration disappeared after 2007. Well, gee, 2007 is when amnesty failed in the Senate. Isn't it a coincidence that the immigration flow went down after that happened? So that's how I got into this. David Frum says it's like the bipartisan consensus in Europe that it was a great idea to have a common currency. You were a kook. You're a member of the fringe if you opposed this wonderful idea, and now they're realizing that the people on the fringe were right, and they weren't ready for a common currency. Are people aware of the structure? Let me say first why I'm not, reasons that aren't why I'm opposed. I'm not opposed to the immigration reform because it will increase the welfare state. I'm a Democrat. I like parts of the welfare state. If it were like Social Security or Medicare programs I support, I would be for it. It will increase welfare, but that's not why I'm against it. I'm not against it because it's going to screw the Republican Party. I'm a Democrat. I don't care if the Republican Party gets screwed. By that I mean I'm happy to have the debates that we need to have over the size of government, over schools, over the government monopoly on schools, within the Democratic Party. I think we can have a healthy debate. We better have in California because the Democratic Party is sort of all we have. I'm happy to have those debates within the Democratic Party. It doesn't completely bother me that the Republicans would be bringing in millions of voters who are going to vote against them. And it also doesn't bother me that I'm not doing it because I think it will hurt the economy. I'll concede that if we let in, if we have an open borders policy and let in all the world's poor, anybody who wants to come here, which is what some of the people who are behind the bill want, that we'll have a bigger economy. But having a big economy isn't the only be-all and end-all of society. It also matters whether it's an economy that treats all its citizens equally, and that's the basic rub. Are people aware of the structure of the bill? The bill is now structured so the legalization comes immediately, virtually immediately. After 6 months, the Department of Homeland Security issues a plan, and they have 100 plans on the shelf, and then illegals who are here are legalized in so-called provisional status. The only thing that is contingent on border security is moving to a green card and citizenship, but the provisional legal status gives them 95% of what they want, and what they need. So when people say, well, we want to secure the border first, you have to ask them, first before what? If it's only first before a green card and citizenship, it's a scam. That's what the Senate bill does. It legalizes immediately and puts the border security for later. That's what we did in '96. We got the amnesty and we never got the border security. 1986, and it was followed by this giant wave of illegal immigration. That's what we don't want to have happen again. Why not have a giant wave of illegal immigration? I had a debate with somebody from the Libertarian Cato Institute a few weeks ago, and I had another debate with them on Twitter just last night. You know, people want to come here. They're willing employers. People are willing to hire them. What's so terrible about that? And there are a couple things that are terrible about it. One is it'll clearly lower wages at the bottom of the income scale. These are the people, the manufacturing workers, the unskilled workers, the janitors, the people who have been hurt most by outsourcing of jobs overseas over the past few decades. They will get screwed even more because not only will the jobs that could be moved overseas, but there's some jobs that have to be performed here. They're personal service jobs, janitor being a perfect example. So if you can't outsource it, what's the next best thing if you're a cost-cutting employer? You import an impoverished immigrant to do the job for much less money. So those Americans who are doing those jobs, which are the only jobs really left for unskilled Americans, will see their wages cut. Now, there's a big economic debate, which we can get into, over whether overall low-wage workers will net see a wage cut or a wage increase, and it depends how you rig the economic assumptions. But there's no doubt that people at the bottom of the unskilled labor pool will get hurt. That's very bad for welfare reform, because the whole deal of welfare reform was we told people who were thinking of joining drug gangs or thinking of basically living off their girlfriend's welfare check, no, you can't do that anymore. Go take a job, take any old job, take a pizza delivery job, take a dry cleaning job. It won't pay much, but it'll pay enough to raise a family. We'll add the earned income tax credit, we'll add Medicaid, and it'll be enough. Take any old job, that's better than being on welfare. Well, this completely destroys that, because it means taking any old job won't be good, because you're going to be competing against somebody from Bangladesh who's willing to do the job for next to nothing. So when I've gotten a lot of grief for saying that immigration reform will change America irrevocably. And I'm not talking that it will change the racial composition of America, though it will do that. I'm talking about it will destroy the idea that, to my mind, is central to who we are as Americans, which is, it was actually said best by Ronald Reagan in a speech at the convention after he was president. He said, as Americans, we're equal in the eyes of God, but that's not enough. We have to be equal in the eyes of each other. And that's, to my mind, that's the goal that both parties should be going towards, preserving the sense that we're equal in the eyes of each other, including an unskilled guy who goes to work every day. If he does the right thing, he's the equal of anybody else. And that's what we will be losing. I had this debate with this guy from Cato last night, and he said, I said, well, but your opens borders policy will screw unskilled workers. And he said, well, they're low skilled. I mean, screw them. He didn't say screw them, but that was the implicit. And I said, well, how would you help them? And he said, well, we'll give them, we'll shame them about their horrible life choices. Well, what's the horrible life choice if you're born with a strong back and not a strong brain and you go to work every day? You're supposed to all of a sudden get an extra RAM attached to your brain and take a job as a computer coder? I mean, everybody who works every day gets equal respect, and that's the America that we would be losing. I also think, and this is very controversial, but I think it has to be said, a lot of our immigrants, 60% of illegal immigrants, come from Mexico. Mexico is a special case. We've never had a country that shares a 2,000-mile border where people can go back and forth in a day, where they have a colorable claim that we stole a lot of their land to make the Southwest United States. It does, everywhere else in the world where people have poured across the border to a territory that they think might be rightly theirs, it's been trouble. Maybe it won't be trouble here. I hope it's not trouble here, but we would be definitely American exceptionalism would be vindicated again, and we would be the only country where that's ever not happened. I just saw a study today that, if I read it right, says that 66% of potential Mexican immigrants think Mexicans have a right to be in the United States, whether we want them or not. And it seems to me we have to disabuse somehow the potential illegal immigrant population of that notion. And then we can have we're very lucky to have Mexico as a neighbor. They're about as benign a neighbor as we could be living next to Algeria. I mean, really, they're a good neighbor. And in San Diego, there was a story in the New York Times a couple weeks ago. The San Diegans have really, now they respect the Mexicans. They get along with them. Well, what happened? They built a wall. They don't have to, the old saying, good fences make good neighbors. They built a wall, and now they can deal with the Mexicans without worrying that they're going to be, thousands, tens of thousands of undocumented people pouring across the border. They discovered they can do business. They like each other. They like visiting each other's countries. The foundation of amicable relations is a secure border. And the danger is that if the thing that really, and I was trying to think of writing an op-ed piece, what is it that really gets my goat about the potential for this so-called immigration reform, what we call amnesty passing? It's not so much that there'll be a lot of guest worker programs driving down wages, because you can always revoke them later. It's not permanent. What it is let me put it this way. The commentator Lawrence O'Donnell, who is not as liberal as you think he is in real life, said we could have had immigration amnesty years ago if only we'd secure the borders first. Then we have amnesty. And that's still true now. We could, I would endorse a bill that said, look, secure the border first, have an e-verify system, build the fence, have an exit entry system, and then in 5 years, if all those things are working, America doesn't have a problem assimilating the 11 million illegals. We just don't want another 11 million and another 11 million. The problem is that that's what we're going to get. We're going to get serial amnesties because we're going to pass the legalization, the enforcement isn't going to happen, and we're not forcing the potential immigrants to give up on the dream that they have a right to be here, and that after this wave, there'll be another wave and another wave and another wave. And that is permanent. If we pass this bill, we're locking ourselves into a cycle of amnesty after amnesty after amnesty. And that's why it's such a big deal. It's a bigger deal than a tax bill. It's a bigger deal even than a welfare reform bill, a Social Security bill, because that is permanent. You will never stop that once it gets going. The issue of whether it hurts Republicans is actually a very interesting one. I mean, the Republicans lose the Hispanic vote 70-30. I mean, Romney got, 27? McCain, who was Mr. Amnesty, got 31 or 2. Didn't make that much difference. So is it Republicans, in order to win more of the Latino vote, want to let in more Latinos? Is that going to help them or hurt them? Well, they lose this group 70-30. I haven't seen an analysis that actually goes through the numbers and says, what would Republicans have to win more of the Latino vote if it expands as much as it would? It's hard to see for me how that's a winner. And I've had Democratic consultants pull me aside and say, the Republicans think it's going to help them. It's not going to help them. Those are our voters. They'll always be our voters. My basic response is is nobody's saying Latino workers don't make Southern California run or increasingly larger the larger country run. Nobody's saying that there won't be a lot of Mexican immigrant workers and immigrants from all over the world under any system. I just ask you to imagine for yourself, what would America look like if we had no border at all? Would you want to live in that society? Would it be an America where everybody was valued as an equal, that was an America we could recognize and value? And I don't think it would be. I think it would look like Blade Runner. I think Los Angeles would look like Rio de Janeiro. I think there'd be a vicious Hong Kong-like class system with dirt poor people at the bottom and really rich people at the top that could never go to a ball game or do something as equals. And in order to prevent that, we need control of the border. We don't need to keep people out. We can let a lot of people in, but we just need control. And the problem is, unless we have the mechanisms of control, we're going to lose control. If they pass this bill, we will lose control. And we'll have wave after wave of amnesty, and who knows where that will end up. The best years Black America's had recently, I'm pretty sure, and maybe the best years they've ever had, were the late 90s. Why were those good years? Because we had a tight labor market. You didn't have to be the owner of McDonald's. If you showed up at work, any job, the owner was so happy to see you that he paid you a decent wage. And amnesty will ensure that we never have that situation again. Because anytime there's any demand, employers will just bring in labor and they will not bother to pay more to the people who do the basic job of showing up every day. So in my America, you don't have to be the owner of McDonald's to live with dignity. You can work at McDonald's and live with dignity. I think we don't have border security first because the Democrats don't want border security, period. They know if we have it first, we'll actually get it. I was at a debate recently with somebody from La Raza who was saying how terrible it was that we had spending all this money on enforcement. It was ridiculous. We should only arrest criminals. Well, that means everybody else gets in. So the Democrats are scared of things like the fence and E-Verify, not because they won't work, but because they will work, and they might work. So I think that's the basic reason. It's because people haven't given up on the dream of a never-ending wave of immigration. This whole debate, I think, is really about getting immigration activist groups to give up on that dream. We've even had some of it here. I mean, people who want jobs in America don't have a right to come to America just because they want the job. We have a right to control our borders. We should be Americans. We should be welcoming. We should let in lots of immigrants. We already let in more than any other country. We should probably let in even more. But I think that's the answer, is that people like Representative Gutierrez and La Raza don't want to give up on the idea that border security really won't happen. So they want it second so they can vitiate it like they did in '86. And the other two questions were the visa overstays, I think, is a very difficult problem because it's not just a question of stopping people coming in. You also have to keep track of them when they leave. And it's just, there's been a law in the books requiring a system to track visa overstays for 9 or 10 years. And it's a law. The federal government has to have it, but they don't have that system. And I think in part it's just because it's very hard to design. If you go to Mexican-American communities, they will make sure you know about this problem because they rightly think it's very unfair that they are blamed for the entire illegal immigrant problem when 40% are visa overstays. You can't say that they're not right about that, but it's just a difficult technical problem. You basically have to say, to tell people here on visas, look, you tell us you've left or we're coming to get you, and that's a very manpower and computer intensive. And the third is, why not have a guest worker program? I'm in favor of a guest worker program. I'm in favor of a visa program that lets people stay. I think I'm enough of a Democrat, and I believe in what Reagan said. I think if you come to this country and work, you should be a citizen. That's why we have to control it, because I don't think we want a second class of people who work and aren't citizens. But if people want to come here and then go back home at the end of the year, especially in Mexico, if they want to resume that circular flow that used to exist, where they would come during the season and then go back home, that's fine. I think But in order to do any of that, you have to have control. You have to be able to say, okay, this year we want 500,000, this year we want 1 million, but we don't need the jobs some other years. You can't just say anybody who wants to come can come. And I think that's in essence what the debate is about. Yes, there was a recent study by the Cato Institute saying that showing that welfare benefits, if you add them all up, if you got them all, including housing assistance, pay more than a minimum wage job in 35 states or so. And I think you have to do both. The job has to pay more, and you have to require the people on welfare to work. And yes, the jobs that they would take are the very jobs that illegal immigrants and immigrants in general, unskilled immigrants, compete for. And the more the wage is lowered for those jobs, the harder it is to get people off of welfare. I think that's completely true. The welfare reform has been quite successful in this regard. There used to be 5 million families on welfare, now there are less than 2. So some of those people have been shunted into disability, but welfare reform did what it was supposed to do, which is it sent a signal to people saying, you gotta work, the game has changed. And that had the effect of driving over half the people into the labor force, where most of them did pretty well. About 2/3 of them did very well. So, it's not that we're not making any progress, but it just makes it much, much harder. And it's also, there's the culture which says that going to work in a lousy job is chump change. Why would you do that? And that's the mentality you have to get rid of. And if a job pays a little, that helps get rid of that mentality. Very, very good question, a very tough question, because there hasn't been the fervor I've hoped. On the other hand, there hasn't been a whole lot of fervor on the other side either. The question is, what did I think of? I was saying that the big battle for amnesty is what happens in August. Do the people show up at the town halls and instill fear into these congressmen that if they vote for amnesty, they're going to lose their seats? And the question is, did enough of them show up to do the job? Numbers USA, which is one of the main anti-amnesty organizations, thinks enough did the job. Remember, it's not a question of who gets on the news. It's a question of, do you let the congressman know that he's in trouble if he votes for amnesty? And I think some of the heavy lifting is being done by the presidential primaries. In other words, you look at Marco Rubio, what happened when he endorsed amnesty, he went down. You look at Ted Cruz, what happens when he opposed amnesty, he soared to the top in Iowa. So any politician from a red state doesn't need a town hall to tell him which way Republican voters go. I don't think that's a substitute for showing up and yelling at your congressman, but it's a partial substitute. I also don't think there's been a lot of fervor on the other side. I went to the rally in Bakersfield. They promised 4,000 people. They maybe turned out 1,000 people. Basically it's been low levels on both sides, lower than expected, in part because the people who are promoting amnesty realized that they didn't want to make a lot of noise. They purposely didn't put out their bill in the House before the recess because they didn't want to give people something to rally around. They haven't even sent the Senate bill over to the House, so there's no bill in the House to react against. As Ann Coulter said, they realize that the way to pass amnesty is never to talk about it. Now, I don't know if they can actually get all the way. I don't quite see how they actually pass it without ever talking about it. But so far, their strategy has worked in terms of tamping down the opposition. I'd say it's 50-50. It was 50-50 before the recess. It's 50-50 whether the opposition so far has been enough to do the job. And I think it's 50-50 whether it passes. A lot of it depends what happens from here on out. And after the recess is over, when it finally comes to the floor of the House, is there an upsurge of outrage? We didn't see that with the Senate until the very end. I think if we see what we saw, the reaction to the Senate bill in terms of the House, that'll be enough to do the job, but it hasn't happened yet.
I have a question, Mickey. I know you have friends on both sides of the aisle, so I think you're a pretty good person to answer this question. The left likes to paint conservatives as, if they're anti-amnesty, as being racist or bigots, etc. What do you think about that charge?
It's basically bogus. I mean, I was, in welfare reform, the same charge was made about my side, which was the same side as Bill Clinton was on, which was we should reform the welfare system. And I accept that if you did a survey of all the racists in the country, and they're a small minority, but they're out there, and most of them would probably support welfare reform. I mean, we had more of them on our side than they had on their side. The same with immigration. If you took a survey of the people who are racist in the country, more of them probably are for immigration. That doesn't determine the issue. It doesn't mean that 99% of the people who are opposing amnesty aren't doing it for non-racial reasons. But there are also legitimate worries about assimilation. I'm not that worried about will Latinos, for example, learn English. I mean, those worries have been slightly put to rest by Univision starting an English language network, because they know their clients better than I do, and they said the kids don't speak Spanish, they speak English, so we have to start an English language. So I think we have a pretty effective assimilation machine. Some people say the third generation winds up more on welfare than the previous two. It's possible, but my main worries are the ones I said about the effect on wages, on social equality, on welfare, and the particular problem of being right next door to Mexico and having people not realize that there's a border there.
Not amnesty, but reform.
Well, the people are going to attack E-Verify as much as they can to stop it. I think it can work, and if the bill passes that says we legalize now and E-Verify later, they're going to attack it hammer and tongs in court on just similar grounds to make sure it never happens. That's why we have to say, no, you don't get legal at all until it's in place. Then people will say, well, wait, if we sue and delay it for 5 years, we're not going to make it legal. They'll let it happen. I think all the data I've seen is that it can work. It's worked in a phenomenally large number of cases, 99%. And the ACLU will never be happy if there's any errors at all.
And the reason I asked that, my last part of that question, is because with this particular administration, obviously he has already bent the rule of law. He's not following the Constitution, period. So what makes us think that any reform is going to be actually followed?
Well, that's right. So, totally right. I mean, one of the biggest blows to his immigration plans was when he delayed the employer mandate. Because all the Republicans on the Hill say, wait, if he does this to his own pet bill, now he never really liked the employer mandate, but he's delayed some other parts that he actually does like. If he does this, he's obviously going to do have the same discretion with immigration. I think he's really undercut himself there, and I actually think the courts are going to pin him back. I went to law school. The one thing lawyers are good at is they're good at setting rules that limit people's discretion. They're not much good for anything else, but I think they're good at that, and they're going to look at this president and say, he's a little out of control. We need to cabin him. But yes, I mean, I wouldn't trust him at all. The question is, nobody's explained why the immigration system is broke and what's broken in it. And it's a very good question, because I don't think it's as broken as people say it is. I mean, there are a couple of misconceptions. One is that the immigration system is horribly broken. Well, it's not horribly broken. We have a thriving city. We're doing okay. I don't see riots in the streets. I don't see massive employers not being able to find workers. So it's not broken in any crisis sense. And the second thing is they act as if being deported was like a capital punishment. It's like the end of the world. Oh, you're deported. It's like you're dead. Well, no, you're deported. It happens all the time. You're someplace where you're not supposed to be, and you're told to leave. You go to someplace else. You go to your home country. It's not the end of the world. So I think that's one of the common misconceptions. I do think the way it's broken is that the border is still porous. That's, to my mind, the way it's broken. And the enforcement mechanism which we were promised in '86 was that employers were going to basically check to see if, and they don't. What we set up in '86 was the worker lies to the employer, and the employer winks and pretends to think that the worker is legal, and then everybody's happy. We need a system that stops that. That's the main way it's broken. I also think they should finish the fence. because I think fences tend to work everywhere. The fence in Israel works. The fence in San Diego works. Why do we not think a fence in Arizona and Texas will work? Sorry, you had a follow-up?
In one sense, we can protect our own home, but yet, because right now, nobody will let me bring my family into your house and demand a better lifestyle.
Right. Right. That's
If I brought my family and moved into Mark's house,
right.
all the police,
That's
all of a sudden America has become weak.
I
And the triple point, what Terry Anderson always said, anytime they tell you secure the border first, that's a joke. Because they didn't secure it in 86, why they going to secure it again?
Well, I agree with everything you say. When I debate with my libertarian friends, I say, well, you're a libertarian, you believe in private property. Suppose we gave the country to you, okay? Then you could keep people out. Could you say, hey, it's my country, get the hell out? But somehow they don't believe in controlling borders when it's the nation's borders, and I don't understand it. I think we could. I think the reason is that the people don't want it to work, and the Border Patrol Union would always rather have something that requires more manpower and high-tech gizmos rather than a simple fence that sits there every day and doesn't pay union dues. Well, it's very tough. It's like it's a David and Goliath. The answer is that while the voters may be split down the middle on for it, all the intensity is on our side. And politicians respond to intensity. So basically all we have is the voters. And I think we had enough voters. We had enough voters last time. If they can be mobilized, that's enough to stop it in the House.
But our politicians have on the Republican side have a choice between the money that's going to fund their next campaign.
Right. And the donors have never stopped talking to them, and the donors are whispering in their ear, you've got to find a way to get to yes and vote for this. And the only thing stopping them is fear. But right now, fear of democracy. But so far, it's been enough. I mean, I'm a little bit counting on the Washington principle, which is you never satisfy the money people right away. You always milk them for 3 years of donations before you give them what they want. So I'm sort of hoping that some of these congressmen will say, well, if I keep this guy on the hook for 3 more years, I'll get 3 years of donations out of him. But it's voters versus money. That's the basic, simple dichotomy here. And it's voters versus money and the media. The media is also all on their side.